How are you, dear?
Great. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Anne Schopf, and I am design partner with Malem Architects in Seattle. I was the last year's chair for the AIA Committee on Design, and this year's chair is Mike Mentz, who he is busily preparing for the conference that will be happening here in Columbus over the next 2-3 days. So he'll be joining us shortly, and he will be also bringing a handout when he arrives, and we'll pass that out to help you participate in this afternoon's conversation. So what we hope today is really about is a conversation defining architectural design excellence. And we are spending the year really interrogating this subject. The panelists that you see before you have spent a lot of time conversing back and forth in long email chains about the subject, and so we hope to bring that conversation to life for you today. So we've decided to come to Columbus as our first site this year, really because of this rich collection of fine architecture within a relatively small community, and we hope most of it will be on foot, walking, and enjoying your wonderful community here. So thank you for inviting us in. So who I have here before us are, let's see, I'm going to go through the list here. Will Bruder, of course, is an architect out of Phoenix, Arizona. Ed Feiner was the founder of the GSA Design Excellence Program. We have Jane Weinzapfel of Lears Weinzapfel, a Boston firm that won the AIA Firm Award in 2007. Yeah. And Susan Szenasy, editor of Metropolis Magazine. And of course, Kelly Wilson of the center here. And thank you so much for welcoming us and having us. Appreciate that. So with that, Will, are you ready?
I guess I'm ready to go.
Right. Please welcome our panelists.
So, design excellence. I think something that we all aspire to. I believe that our clients really hire us to achieve that. It's how good a listener we are towards that journey, what kind of dialogue we create on that journey. To my knowledge, I think it's hidden there somewhere in a B-141. There's a blank on that back page that says here, when you're filling out your contract on this project, Mr. Architect, you will be blank % your best. You filled those out, right? When you were young, you were at your 98% level. Some people have wandered probably to the 30% level. No, you haven't, because all our clients expect us to create design excellence. And if anybody sort of doesn't hold that creed up, it unfortunately is a lot of our peers. Because a lot of the things that we saw on our journey here and that we will see walking among these fine examples are definitely not design excellence. Again, aspirations of it, different definitions of it, but it's a very challenging thing. And I think we, in this future now with the millennial generation and what we're seeing in the schools happening, it's really an important and potent time to talk about this issue, because we're not even talking on the same language anymore. I just came down from IIT, where I have the Morgenstern Chair. I taught there in studio yesterday. And it's very interesting as we look in the eyes of these young students to try and be their mentors and their guides. And you talk about proportion and scale. You talk about community. You talk about how it fits in context. And you get these blank looks. You wonder what you're talking about. So I think it's really important for all of us in this room. And while I'm really glad to see all my peers here, it'd really be great as we talk about this thing, there should be an equal number of people half as old as we are that look different than we look. And that's pretty haunting. But the basics, for me, the definition of design and architecture is the balance of the pragmatic and the poetic. It sounds so simple, but architecture is this unusual art form that is complicated by this idea of cooperation, collaboration, placemaking, vast teams, dependent on so many people. And as an art form, it is really the best work always meets those pragmatic criteria of place. Sustainability is an old idea and now a new idea again. And how we balance that, it's the making, the craft, the materiality. It's the engagement of the craftsman as well as the client. And towards that end, building needs to keep elements out and be appropriate, and there's pragmatism. But pragmatism doesn't raise the hair on the back of your neck. It doesn't become that thing that just compels and drives us to this other way. And poetry is very much about what that ties us to art, the art of architecture. And poetry, you know, is that finite line of how we manipulate space and materials, how things come together, how light is choreographed through our buildings, how we make better places to work that are really almost like design dance scores. But if it's all poetry and it doesn't meet the pragmatic test, you know, you've got this great imbalance. So as a point of reference in my conversations today and in Washington, you know, I will always be looking at that balance. You know, that poetry, all too often lately, while it might make covers and all kinds of things, belongs better in model form and drawings in museums than in the built world. And there is that search always, and when you find it and when you go to those buildings, it just click with that, and we all know who some of those names might be. The Altos, the Banderos, the Corbuts, different ways of interpreting that, and get lost in pictures and travels. But I'm very interested in defining that sort of attitude. And I'm going to just close right now with a colleague, a friend, very good friend, wrote this little thought about what is architectural design excellence. When we experience architectural design excellence, all our senses are alerted and nourished. Our curiosity is piqued, our time and place is reflected and respected in unexpected ways. Our minds are open to new ideas, our confidence in the possibility of the human endeavor is renewed. We feel comfortable yet challenged, understood yet urged to stretch. We want to be in such places alone and together with others. We want to be in such places at all times of the day and night and through all seasons. We want time in such places to learn their secrets and confirm the validity of our initial awe. We want such places to serve as markers of our best efforts. We want such places to exist beyond our lifetime. It's going to be an interesting journey and conversation the next 3 days. I first came to this town in 1965 at the invitation of Irwin Miller's aunt, and in an usual collision as a young man with a great house by Eero Saarinen for Irwin Miller on a lake in the Muskoka Lake region of north of Toronto. A masterwork. We will get to share his other masterwork of a residential nature today. I know we're all in for something special. I look forward to the conversation with my colleagues here, and but I guess that sums it up.
Fantastic. Thank you.
I'm next.
You are.
Hi, everyone. It's really wonderful to be here. I have not been to Columbus before, so this is a very new experience for me, although our writers have been having their feelers out here for a long time, except I'm as the chief editor, don't get to travel on these beautiful trips. I get to go to, well, I'm not going to tell you where I've been. So, but I think for me, and I'm not an architect, so I have to start with that proviso, because I do not speak architectese. I do not understand it. I'm the person who actually had to diagram Peter Eisenman's sentences in order to get half of what he said, and I still don't understand. So I'm a kind of an either a very happy user of architecture or an extremely unhappy victim. And I'm a victim more often than I'd like to be. So I relish the user, the happy user part of my relationship with architecture. And one of the things that I'd like to talk about to begin with is people, users, us, non-architects, vision and version of architecture and understanding of architecture and connection with architecture. I think one of the things that happens is that people tend to be forgotten by the obscureness of the abstraction of the program, the sort of willingness to build amazing form, but it really discounts the people. So you get a Libeskind museum where they have to put down 2x4 so people don't walk into the walls. Stuff like that is really difficult for me, and it's supposed to be great art. Well, I just wanted to recount one recent experience which I think is very telling. I was on the Lyceum Traveling Scholarship jury about a week ago in Boston. And it's a wonderful, wonderful scholarship established by a local architect who gives 3 awards for architecture students that win this scholarship. And this year's program was defined as this beautiful and terrifying place in Vermont. It was a quarry that industrialized mining sort of claimed and destroyed, and at the same time couldn't destroy because nature was so powerful. And what they left was an incredibly beautiful and sad place. And next to, and we were looking at the Google map that the students were looking at, and next to this quarry, which was the lifeblood of that region, were 2 little towns, little frame houses, New England frame houses, little modest places, a general store, and they even in the brief for the competition, they even had the amiable little shopkeeper's face in there, so that they didn't say that that you needed to include the local community in the design, but it was implied that it was part of this local community. So we went through 221 entries from 11 schools, 11 architecture schools. And they either did something with the stone in the quarry, which is beautiful, really lovely, and they used the material really well. They either did something with the remnants of the industrial world that occupied it, which was at its very best. It was really intriguing and beautiful and imaginative. They never combined the two, and they never thought of including the local community, somehow making a channel into the local community. In fact, they never showed how human beings would occupy those places. You didn't get a chance to see the interior. You didn't, I mean, what is a building but an interior space? I mean, we don't hang off the facade, this fabulous facade of the building. We actually sit down and plant our butts on chairs. So this was really, really interesting to me that this very connected generation of designers, of architects, who are in their almost last year, could not connect with the people in the local community. They're so busy connecting on their various, pads and pods and whatever that they're collecting on, that they're forgetting the real human experience. And that scared me really badly, because these are from the very best schools. They are taught by the very best architects. They are given the brief and help in studio about this project. They should have studied the context, the full context. They should have figured out the humanity that's going to occupy the new colony that they're building, and how it would relate to the old colony that is there, that will depend on this new colony's business to recreate itself, because industrial sites are all over the place and communities surrounding them have been decimated, so we know the jobs issue. But it didn't happen. And that is not design excellence. So when the people are missing, the community is missing, the sort of connectivity is missing, and the human face is missing, that is poor design, no matter how beautiful we think it is, no matter how many covers it gets, it's not working.
Okay, great, thank you. All right, Ed, you'll be next, and I think you have some images.
Yeah, why don't, are we ready with the images?
And so it's going to be...
I'm going to press the buttons. All right, first of all, before I go through this really quickly, I'll give you a disclosure statement. I like clarity and simplicity of ideas and communications, and I consider architecture and design a form of media and communications. I'm a reformed, hyphenated architect. For most of my career, I was known as a government architect or a public architect, which is a lesser life form than a real architect. They'll throw me out of the AIA after this. All right. We never called it a design excellence program when we started.
Put the lights down.
When we started in GSA, we never called it a design excellence program. We actually identified pieces that we thought would lead to something, but we put the stuff together, and then we figured out what we were building. We didn't start by saying, we want to do design excellence. I think that's fallacious approach. But we did know that we wanted to do something. And keep this in mind, a lot of what I will say has to do with public buildings. And I consider public buildings part of the infrastructure. Police, police precincts, firehouses, courthouses, anything that is of the collective interests of the community. So my definition is a little broader. Simplicity, lasting, comprehensive, and inspirational. And that's what we finally came up with as a direction to go in. All right, what does it mean? This is what I'd like to talk about really quickly. What does design excellence mean? Does it evolve over time? How can you tell you have it? And is it worth it? And just very quickly, all right, that's the dictionary definition. You notice they use the word excellency. They use the same word, which is a clue that they don't know what to say it is. All right, but you see what it says. All right. It's probably the most overused word in the English language today after professional. I mean, the people that pick up the garbage in front of my house are professional garbage picker-uppers. And Generation Y, there must be some of you back there. Yeah. Everyone gets a trophy, so everyone's excellent. All right, at one time there was no question that we built for the ages. And this applied both to public and private architecture. I just came back from Holland and Belgium, and you don't have to ask about excellence. It's part of the genetic makeup of their culture, of their civilization, and that has to do with people, by the way. I don't tell you who designed these, but somewhere we went wrong. At some time we degraded what we consider to be buildings that are worth building. All right, I'm just going to talk very quickly about the design excellence experience at GSA. It is an evolving definition. It's still evolving. If they can get beyond the newspapers today, they will continue to evolve. It started in the 60s with the guiding principles of federal architecture, which they're celebrating right now, 50th anniversary. Senator Moynihan, at that time he wasn't a senator, he penned them. But during the 60s, there were high ideals about what we should be building as a society, as a civilization, what we leave behind. And you can see some of the things that happened during that period. We actually had an NEA that was done under Richard Nixon. So this was the thing, these were the things that happened. The 70s was a period of contradictions. It was the founding of the National Endowment for the Arts and Federal Design Assembly, but then there were pieces that began to show up that started to change the definition of what you should be building. Things like construction management, lease purchase, which became eventually design builds, 3P, private partnerships, all of that stuff where the architect never gets to talk to the owner or to the client. And then eventually they ended the GSA Design Awards program because there was nothing to really recognize. All right, the 80s was a period, getting there. The 80s was a period of efficiency and performance. That's when technology took the lead. The computers were being created. We didn't yet apply them very much to design, but they affected the design of buildings. And you can see all the things, it's coming back. Quality workplace. How many of you are familiar with the space reduction program of the federal government, where they're putting 10 people on a pinhead or something like that? Actually, they're telling them to stay home, don't come to work. During the 1990s, we started to develop iconic architecture again. And you can see what had happened. We started a design awards program because there was some stuff that was worthy of being recognized. We developed peer review, many of the things that you're familiar with today. Over 100 major projects were developed during that period, and the next to the last one was one of the worst experiences, which was Oklahoma City, because that to us was the 9/11 that everyone else thinks about. We thought of Oklahoma City because it happened 5 years earlier, and now mixed messages. Security rules, We looked at mid-century modernism, which I think all of us are going to experience a lot of here. The construction bubble and the bubble burst. And then eventually it became speed and special focus, jobs, 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 get it built, do design build, don't worry about what it looks like or how it functions, get it done, and save energy along the way. But that became a broadened definition of excellence because we started to throw a lot of things on the thing. And a lot of it had to do with efficiency and cost. And, all right, we're almost there. The emergency of the word design excellence as a brand or a trophy. And you can see we have challenges. The challenge of new project delivery strategies. We're going back to the future. You know, the architects used to be the master builders. Now there's someone else that's doing master building, not often the architects. And design is a commodity rather than as a professional service. The relationship between the architect and the client, Michelangelo and Pope Julius, that kind of relationship, or whoever built the pyramids. By the way, I use pyramids as the example because I think they're a beautifully simple form, and they represented the technology of their day. We don't even know really how they did it. We'll figure it out eventually. And excellence is a brand. Remember the new Coke? How many of you remember the new Coke? It lasted like a week, but it was excellent. This is my very simple but complicated definition. Clearly identifiable as an exemplary advancement for its time. Technology, materials, relationship, ideas, relationship to community, what was important of its time, and it has perceived, because you can only perceive it, a lasting value for the ages. And that's where you have to take the kind of leap of faith for us to look and say something is really excellent. We have to perceive that it will stand a test of time. And someone will not rip it down like they're ripping down some buildings around here, I think, to replace them or something like that. All right, how do you know how do you tell you can have it? Well, I'm a populist in a certain way as it comes to design, because I said it was simple. Not simple-minded, but simple. This is what we tried to figure out. How can we tell if things were working? And this is what I call, you know, National Design Awards. It's great to be recognized and loved by the elite, and probably everyone in this room is elite. By Sarah Palin's definition. But we're all, you know, to a certain extent, we're here because we think. We have ideas and ideals. All right, I'm almost done. I'm over. All right.
Yeah, you're over.
All right. We looked at it, how it was reacted to by the elites and also by the public. How did they respond to these buildings? It's their money, and did show up on postcards and the covers of phone books. And there's the example. They did. Is it worth it? This is John Kennedy's quote. It's my favorite quote. And it means so much. It's an election year. Read this one. Appreciate what it says.
Can you read it? We can see it.
I look forward to an America which will not be afraid of grace and beauty. John F. Kennedy. It's on the wall of the Kennedy Center when you walk in. And who are you doing it for? You can read that real quickly. And these are some of the things that we did. We didn't do it ourselves. We did it, you guys in the room, and the American architectural community actually did it. So that's it.
Thank you.
7.
Okay, you can cut me off whenever you
No,
want to.
you just go ahead.
Because this is a question for myself. It's not an answer here. I started to think on the plane this morning about the tree and the cave and the found space that our ancestors.
Talk a little louder to the group. I'm being cued from the audience.
Yes. Okay. But in any event, there's a shelter that we looked for early on, and probably in a rainstorm we still would look for a tree or a cave or something. And then there was a kind of emerging ability to do better than that, which we still see happening, but it's not necessarily healthy. The favelas in Brazil, the troglodyte houses that we as architects admire, but they're not always healthy. There's kind of mold and other things happening. And then we look at a kind of basic level of shelter that is safe for people. It's healing. It doesn't have disastrous building products. It meets the code. It
has views and lights, and it's sustainable. It has a second item, which is it's a good value. This basic accommodation that we're looking for. It's made out of durable materials. It's right-sized. It's useful. It's supportive of individual life values, and it's long-lived. And then the third thing it has is it has pride of place. It has some individual sense of beauty, of harmony, of delight, of connection with place, of connection with culture and community, and perhaps a legacy, a contribution to the future. That to me is a very baseline of, before we're talking about excellence in architecture, I think you have to start at a baseline. So I'm not starting at the top, I'm starting here, because it's a place that we each can make happen. We can still, in this day and age, build a house for ourselves, or select a house from a contractor's portfolio of houses. We can buy one that's already been made that we admire, and we invest ourselves in it. And it has all those attributes, that it's safe, it's a good value, it has a pride of place. So what, when we are talking about architectural excellence, what is different from that? And we've certainly the balance of the poetry and pragmatism, certainly bringing in the community to the thinking, the importance of it not just being an individual icon, but connected. And then the aspirations of a nation that Ed has been talking about. So for me, those next elements are the idea of an aspiration. And whose aspiration is that? Sometimes it's our client's aspiration. Someone may want a house that is a little more suited for their family. Maybe they have a child with a disability and they have to do that. Look for a house that's more suitable. Maybe they have a unlimited wealth. They've just come off their rock star era and they want to now enjoy it, you know. So they may come, and with that particular aspiration, to an architect who must listen as to what that aspiration is. And then as sometimes people come to an architect because they need to have something stamped. It has to meet the code, it's a commercial piece. I'm not saying at that point that there's necessarily an aspiration, unless it's to be that fast, quick, cheap thing, and then the architect's rather in a dilemma because your client is asking for fast, quick, and cheap. So you're trying to make it the best that you can. I guess I've done my minutes. So, but I'm going to take Senator Kelly's 1 minute
I yield.
and say that I think it's this the communal aspiration that we look to architects to bring forward. That is, listen to a client, but the client is also affecting the community, because the community is going to live with whatever the client is putting in place. So what are the aspirations of both the client, the community, and what does the place deserve? What is the setting that it is in? All of these things contribute to that aspiration. Senator Kelly.
In my, I must have been my second year of undergraduate school at Auburn, walking from a studio to somewhere with my colleagues, a professor named Louis Lanter, who's now deceased, who was a curious guy, because he was very intelligent. Back then, Auburn didn't have much of a faculty, I don't mind saying. So we were really stunned by the stuff he said. And he we were talking about architecture, and he said, ask any one of us. He meant professors. No one will tell you. Have you ever noticed what architecture is? Go ahead, ask anyone. It stopped me dead in my tracks. I thought, that's irony. Oh, I recognize irony. That's irony. That stuck for a long time. No one would tell you what it was. And because anyone who would claim that architecture is excellent for this or that reason, it's just too easy, because architecture addresses so many things, to claim one better than the other. Because in the end, architecture is brilliant in my mind when it's multivalent, which is different than ambiguous. I know the experience of it when I feel it, which is that the experience comes on slow, never comes on in a rush. It's something I can return to over and over and over, and I keep finding discoveries within it. They tease themselves out because you're meant to live with this thing. Now, this is true for, that definition is true for most all articles of art. And the fortune of listening to Mr. Paul Rand, graphic designer, say, brilliance in design is when you cannot distinguish between form and content. It's a definition where those two things are so concretized to themselves, they cannot be separated. For form, by itself, blunts meaning. Meaning, without form, loses interest. Now, this is a good thing. This works too. Works for almost all design. But forced, and I have to tell you that I do not believe in finite definitions. I believe most things are a conjecture awaiting refutation, and has been the most useful way to think in my education about this problem of what is it when something is intelligent, not mediocre. But forced to make this distinction to my students at the GSD a few years back, when we had a show in the gallery of an artist who had made work that looked like architecture, though was not, and recent architectural projects that looked like art but were not. What was the difference? How do I know the distinction between an act of architecture and an act of something else? Because I cannot describe excellence until I know what something is. Well, I'm going to offer this one. And my colleagues take issue with me, but I suppose that's the point of this. Architecture is the invention, consideration, the fabrication, the making of the membrane of space we place over and about the significance of our activities. Now, that definition for me works for street. What's meaningful isn't always a church or a museum. A great artist or designer knows how to raise the circumstantial to the level of the monumental. I'm also a painter, and when I paint outside in Boston's harbor by the Science Museum, they have a dam there. After Charles River Dam, I'll be painting for 4 hours and a fish jumps. I come home to tell my wife, oh my God, this fish, it came right out of the water. She looks at me going, I know what she's thinking, that is banal. But not for me, because I had worked so hard to see deeply into something that it was momentous. An artist, an architect, would know how to take something circumstantial in our lives, find where it could be greatly meaningful, and make what I call that spatial membrane around it. That spatial membrane can be materialized, stretched, fragmented, poked holes in, sequenced, given life. It's the context we walk with. So with that definition in my mind, I analyze things to determine whether they're smart or they're stupid by asking questions that pertain to that. Thank you.
So, a little bit of change of, we don't have 20 minutes anymore. We've just got 10 minutes now, so just so you know, just give you a little update, 10 minutes, because I want to make sure that I have reserved time for a greater discussion. So go at it. Susan.
Okay, so this was really interesting because we just heard that we know excellence when we feel it and when we see it. And we say that about pornography, we say that about a lot of things. So I think what's really interesting about that, actually, is that everything that human beings are doing right now, every profession, every endeavor we're undertaking, including medicine and law and technology, is under question. Everything. So architects seem to think that they are the only ones who are asking these excellence questions, and the world is asking these questions. We belong to a culture that is trying to find itself. And I think the sooner the architectural dialogue expands out into the larger culture, as we're all trying to find ourselves as creatures of the 21st century and understand our place in it, the sooner architecture will get the respectability that it will deserve when it does that. Right now, I don't think it deserves that respect. I think that we're spending too much time on stars and silly forms and no, they're not silly, they're beautiful. But you know, I was thinking about this coming in as you are so lucky in Columbus that you were not building at the time today, because you'd have a leaf skin crunching at you, you'd have a REM overwhelming you, you'd have a Gary scaring you. So and so, can you imagine that city when you invite the perceived to be the very excellent architects of the time? So I think this sort of general search that we're involved with is a really, really good time to define what it means to be an architect as part of that general search. And I hope that in all our conversations we'll start unpacking that somehow.
Yeah. Will, you've been taking a lot of notes.
I think that this issue, again, of these objects that you're referring to, the latest parametrics, I believe that architecture has a role as any art form. Isn't it curious when we go and see a great dance performance, we see a great movie, we might come out not sort of, the ones that challenge us are the ones that take us farther along. And I think I'm not so much interested ever if people like my buildings. It's a nice perk if they do. You obviously aspire to that. But I like to believe that architecture is this armature in which we experience this choreography, this experience, both functional and poetic. And as we leave it, it's given the viewer not the answer to like it or think it's excellent or not excellent, but they can come out and have a wholeness of themselves that they can look at the world from a different point of view, and they're open to that. I think art opens our minds to the possibility of life. And if we can create a educational system from pre-K on out, a culture, as Ed was referring to, that the Dutch have seemed to get genetically in their DNA, that's something that's really what it's about. And I think as we are in this Athens of American architecture here, at one level, not to be derisive, but we have entered a petting zoo, okay? And it's not unlike what we see, because we have all these excellent examples of aspiration. And yet, as we came into town, we have the same strip, we have the same disconnectedness, we have buildings out of context and continuity. At the heart of our journey is going to be some buildings we're going to see shortly, and there's one little street that's totally certifiable, and yet this is no different than Scottsdale, Arizona, with aspirations, no different than Pride's Crossing outside Boston. I mean, there's so many places. We've all become the same, and it's because architecture is too much about the object, and we haven't changed that much. It's always about the object and never about the context and the place. And it should be about the spaces in between. And that's what's really exciting right now, because I think there is the potential for an awareness of urbanism and landscape architecture and our buildings only being part of this puzzle. And I think that's what we have to aspire to in this pursuit of excellence.
You've got more time.
Oh, really?
Yes.
All right, I'll go. How many of you were around at the 150th anniversary of the American Institute of Architects, when they went out? I think they used the Gallup organization to poll the American public on what they thought were the most beautiful buildings in the United States. And there were 150 buildings. Of course, the people were not just asked to, I like this. They were given like 1,000 or 2,000 slides. And they asked them, what are the most beautiful buildings? And unfortunately, I was up at GSD at the time, and I ended up on the front page of the Wall Street Journal that day, because when Alex Frangos, who was the critic, for the Wall Street Journal, called me and said, "Did you see the list?" So I said, "Well, yeah, I did." So he said, "Well," he said, "you saw the Bellagio is more beautiful than Myers Islip Courthouse. How do you feel about that?" So I didn't really understand the context, and I didn't realize I was talking to the press. I'm stupid. And I said, "Oh my God," I said, "that's tasteless." But you know, and I didn't mean the Bellagio was tasteless, but it probably was. But what stood out to me was that when you build for the public, you have other responsibilities. There are all kinds of stakeholders and overlays: community, relationship to the community, to people, to the clients who are using the building. And you did one. You know what it's like. It's a nightmare. But in the end, it is about responsibilities to many different interest groups. And what was really funny was when the public went through their list, there were a lot of them that were really good buildings. They were really fantastic. The Chrysler building was there. I mean, there were some really good buildings. So they're not that stupid. They're really not, but it's not part of our culture. I think that's the biggest problem we have, because we have to ask the question, what is excellence? We can't try to figure it out. When you go to Holland, or Amsterdam in particular, the contemporary lives side by side with buildings that were built in the 1200s. They don't question that. It becomes part of the culture. And the last thing, it's about our education system. And 2 weeks ago, I was involved with on an education seminar on how we design schools for children, K through 12. And the thing is, it is about our education. If you don't start in the very beginning to acclimate people to expect more in music, dance, theater, the performing arts, architecture, art, if they are not introduced to that, and No Child Left Behind does not do it. So that's my political statement. The truth of the matter is we have failed to build our culture from the beginning, and that's why we're sitting here trying to figure out, how do you define excellence? I was a little afraid to be here, because I was afraid that we were gonna go down the street in Columbus and someone was gonna say that cornice is more excellent than that cornice, and I wouldn't be able to do that. So, I mean, I think it's a cultural issue, and it's about responsibility.
Well, there's roach buildings facing one another. There's one that's really bad. So I can tell you right now, yes, sorry.
So with that, we've got the next 10 minutes, and I'd like to open it up to the audience. Is there anyone who'd like to jump into this?
I'd like to jump in. That'll give you all 1 minute in which to think of what your question is to jump in. I don't feel so doom and gloom. I could see a Gary here. I think you know,
One.
and more challenging to me here is to think of urbanization in Columbus and what happens, you know, because we're now more than 50% of the population in the world are in cities, and Columbus has a kind of little buffer. I don't know your growth pattern here, but if you could imagine, you know, one 6 blocks area being 8 times as dense, what would you want to see happening there? These are the kinds of questions that inspire me to think about how do we change, how do we grow, what do we protect? Now you have your questions.
Questions or comments?
Or comment, yeah.
Or both.
Marlene?
Yeah.
I have a comment, I guess for 30 seconds
Yeah.
apiece, right?
Just speak up so everybody can hear.
It's interesting that you're using examples about Starkitects and their failure in many ways to reach a standard of excellence, and the fact that the environment between is what most experience as being the weakest. And it appears to me that even the use of the word excellence means that those that are doing what we might call banal are not required to think about or search for true excellence in the simple strip mall and the simple one-off renovation, which I would argue would be the way to incrementally improve almost everything in our cities in a more positive way. What do you think about that idea that, for the most part, our profession has said unless you're doing the Stark Architects kind of projects, you're not responsible for the excellence in the community.
I think cities are made of background buildings more than they're made of foreground buildings. And when we gain respect for those things that speak to materiality and context and appropriateness, it's not about how much money you can spend or there are these unique opportunities, but I think that we really fall down because too many design review committees talk about color and materials and these sort of issues, right, and form and style. Just imagine if the review was about something so basic as proportion and scale. And if we really looked at what that meant from the individual, the velocity of the car, the nature of the neighbors. I mean, there's so many things that we should really, we can bring to, and it's universal that the public is fascinated by our profession and what the potential of what we do is. And we can bring them along if we engage them in the conversation, the listening. I mean, this is what's rather amazing. It's quite profound in a public forum with public buildings, which I really enjoy the challenge of it doing. When after you go through the initial things and you don't preconceive and you don't bring your style, you bring your ability to really get into the problem. And at that meeting, when they see a concept not preconceived, they're all taking credit in the audience. They didn't know what it would look like when they told you that idea, but somehow they're whispering to their friends, hey, look at that, that's my idea, you know? There's really, that's why it's so strange. There aren't so few really fine-grained and nuanced buildings out there that add to the quality. And often that is the vernacular and the benign, which is great.
Yeah, and that reminds me of the comment that the lady made down here and a lot of the comments that you made. It's making me think right off the bat of a comment that Aldo Rossi made, and I'm not a postmodernist, but I liked his comment about the destiny of a city tied to any one single project, so that any one single project can have an immense impact on the destiny of a city. Whether it is a large, let's say, Stark Tech public or institutional building, or a small residential rehab remodel job. I don't know if that resonates.
I think the question about the city is a very good one. I like your comments. An analogy. How many of you have been to Celebration? Look, that's kind of sort of a little bit of Columbus, but they tried to fill in all the other pieces. All right, and this is the analogy that there was an attempt to create a holistic, very postmodern, a little bit of modern, a little bit of this and that, but very American city, American community, or something like Pleasantville or something like that. That, you walk down the street and if you saw someone put orange in their window, they probably burned a stake in front of their house, or you never heard from them again because everything has to be white. But that takes care of everything. I mean, it's holistic, everything's solved. You can't even walk dogs there. They don't even have pooper scoopers. The dogs don't go to the bathroom. but the other one is Kevin's building, which I experienced just now, the post office. And I thought the humanizing aspect of Kevin's building, because my view from my room is the back, was a very humanizing Lowe's or Home Depot little lawn shed that someone had introduced as part of the urban fabric and of the architecture. You have to look at it. It's really fantastic. It's not red. No, but it has, someone did it and humanized it, and it was really funny. It made it somewhat, in someone's mind, that was appropriate.
But you're describing something I see in cities I find so admirable, is a heterogeneity, that there's so many mixtures of differences, that the worst, I'm going to say this, the most communistic form of architecture I know of is suburbia. Why go visit your neighbor? He's just like you. Why do they put the garage facing your entrance when you pull up to the house? You're never supposed to put your butt first. That's inappropriate. Why would you put your butt where your mouth is? The garage is human, it's American dumping ground. Why is this? Because the contractors want to pour a little more concrete to send the garage driveway around the other side, to the side of the house, which could very well be done. Why is this? Cities are built out of differences, so that a 12-year-old can walk across it, this is Lou Kahn's word, and know what they want to do in life. Because there's enough differences, cheek to jowl, contradictions can sit side by side, because the order of a true city knows how to sustain that. Fake cities do not, which is what celebration is.
There was a, I want to take, yeah, two more.
You all seem to be talking a lot about placemaking, as I think a phrase that's being used a lot today. I'm just curious to hear what each panelist, I know this may be a hard question to answer, thinks the top 3 placemaking issues are for a project of any type. And secondly, if you're going to fulfill the expectations centered on those issues, who should be on your team? Who are you looking for to be part of your team that moves that assignment ahead?
Takers?
Can we start with the team?
Yeah, yeah, you can take
Okay.
it in any order you want.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I think the team obviously has to have community representation, and it has to have all the design and development professions. People who are, actually, the landscape architects have to be there first, because they really need to study the terrain, really need to understand the water tables, really need to understand, the engineers need to be there to figure this one out, the architects need to be part of it, the interiors people need to be part of this, the graphic communication designers. There's absolutely no way that one profession can do all of that unless they have those people on their staffs. I mean, this is not just about the form. What we make is one great form, and then we kind of leave it alone and you know, hope that it will survive. And I think that's one of the huge issues, that your team has to be much more connected to the community, to the environment, to the culture of that community, and to each other as design professionals, and to the developer, and to the person who's financing this. And I think today's technology allows that to happen. I mean, I think integrated project delivery really, if it's done right, it can help to do that. And I think for placemaking, I think obviously coming from New York, I think you know, there are gazillion neighborhoods in that city that are really great places, and it's all about density, adjacency, scale. That's 3, and I can tell you 10 more. But I mean, I just think that all of those things that a great place has include some of those abstractions.
I think it was a talk about placemaking in an auto culture. Right now, it is not we in this room that really make the decisions. When we take back our cities from the streets department, from the fire department, and the trash department, because everything is designed to the scale of all too big of vehicles. It isn't interesting, you can wake up in Paris and barely hear a whisper, and come out and there's things that barely look like they're Suburbans, right? I mean, and they're collecting the trash of the city, discreetly, moving down these streets, you know, all these things, but everything is bigger and better, and there's a whole velocity there that's determining things. I think the idea that thinking about the 20-minute city, when we're talking about placemaking, it has to do 20 minutes on foot, on bicycle, or by transit. We can find happiness in most of the things we need in life. And you can go a long way. I did a little Pechachuca event in Portland, Oregon a couple years ago, and you have, what is it, 2.5 minutes or whatever, and 20 images to get the job done. So I got on a bus, and I went for 20 minutes on the bus. I got off the bus. I was photographing randomly as I went. I then speculated, because my time was limited, because I waited till the end like architects always too often do. It was that night, and I proceeded to figure out where I would have gotten on a bicycle. I would have actually gotten another 5 miles out on a bike than I got on my bus. Then I walked back for 20 minutes from where the bus left me off. And I had an amazing journey in a city rich in its texture and its sort of sense of place. Can we find the dry cleaner? Can we find the bookstore? Can we find a decent restaurant or some local grown food? I mean, so this scale of time and velocity over object and geography, I think is an important one. So I think this is, you know, this is something we have to make as part of our vocabulary, so that when a developer comes to us, or a public entity comes to us, you know, can we engage? Are we brave enough to engage the conversation anymore? Or do we say, yes, okay, you know, what about the discourse? What about the conversation? That's what's so great about events like this. And all too often, and last thing I'll say as a third thing about placemaking is, when are we as architects, when are the students that we mentor and crit and whatever, when are they going to live in their designs? Living in your design happens with that first gesture. Okay, that first idea, it's about what are those livable things, and all too often it's not there. They don't have the passion to live in it, to wake up on a happy day or a sad day, and what is it like? You know.
So I'm just going to, we're going to go and show you the 6 projects, and then each of our panelists are going to have a chance to speak to them directly. So the first project is Fire Station Number 4 by Venturi and Rao in 1967.
Okay, so I thought this was
Oh,
a
wait.
church.
You thought this was a church? What I think I'm going to do, Susan, is I'm going to go through all 6 of them, and then we'll go back. The second one is Hotel Indigo, which many of you are staying at, by Philip Joven Ryle, I'm not sure of the pronunciation, Dimensions Architects, and interior design by Debbie Adrian of Adrian Carr Carradine Design. I'm not sure exactly when this was completed, but 2005 maybe. The next project is Smith Elementary School by John Johansson, 1969. The fourth project is the First Christian Church, Elil Saarinen, 1942. The fifth project is the Miller House, Eero Saarinen and Alexander Gerard and Dan Kiley, 1957. And the final project is Columbus City Hall, Edward Charles Bassett of SOM, and that's 1981. All right, so we'll just have about 20 minutes to use these projects as a way to explore more specifically the diversity of some solutions. So you guys have at it. However you want to do this.
We don't have to talk to all 6 of them. do we?
You do not. You can pick and choose, but to the extent that, I think we can have a discussion.
Well, I think one thing that was totally fascinating in Erwin Miller and his whole genesis of being the patron to this idea of Columbus, why we're all here today, is that working in the 40s on the church, if we want to go back to the church real quick, that was by Arrow and Eel. It was that success and that awakening in an enlightened man that got the whole idea of what this patronage of, I will pay the fees if you choose from my list. But it wasn't his list, it was a curated list. I mean, the water was pretty potent up at Cranbrook. And what the Saarinens brought as an ideal about cities and about placemaking really stuck with him. And there's a sophistication in that one street that I enjoy in Columbus above all others is a combination of the Lincoln School by Gunnar Burkertz, the library by Pei, this building here and its intimacy with the courthouse and the conversation that's established at that point. So this will be a fun one for us to walk with, and the texture and the scale, because a lot of the really excellent things are there. And I think the second one, I think that's the most important one up here, well, along with that was the chance for people like Johansson and Venturi to test ideas just embryo-like. And here was a patron allowing the choice to be made. He didn't say you had to choose Venturi, but he presented a catalog of curated names that they had the freedom to pick from. And it's interesting how they made those choices and that freedom have been mentioned. So,
I think this building has a lot of in-house, in-profession jokes in it, and I don't think anybody gets them. I mean, I just think that I don't know, does it capture your attention? Maybe it does. I mean, I looked at it next to the church, and I thought, oh, isn't that curious how, why would a firehouse have a similar structure to the church? The church made so much sense, beautiful modern interpretation of something that is a really interesting, very unique building type. And the way they figured out the light, the religious symbolism, the scale, the interior playing with the exterior, the sort of godliness of the whole thing. Somehow I think the Saarinens understood spirituality here. I mean, you get this sense that they got it. And I don't know what Venturi understood with that firehouse.
Okay.
I think the firehouse, its tower is in reflection on the hose rather than the worship. It's a hose riding thing. So we have pure Louis Sullivan building here.
Yeah,
I mean,
but
a
it's
pure Louis
something more
form and
than
function.
this, I think.
But remember, I'm the public.
I realize that. I realize that. What's interesting for me about that is that in 1966, Venturi wrote Complexity and Contradiction. Okay, we had been in in a vise almost, between the time of the Miller House and that book and other discussions that were happening, a couple of years earlier. There was a vise. And so this was an intellectual attack on that, and steeped by being in Rome and other things, but intellectually it blew the cap off of things. Architecturally, you're right. It's a kind of
never lived up to that.
So for me, when I see that, I think of the brilliance of the written word in that particular case and the ideas versus the struggle that architects have to get that idea revealed in 3 dimensions with a purpose and everything else. So there's a stretch that was being made that may be missed, but you're so lucky to have that to talk about here, to be able to experience it and to read the book, try to understand what is there, and
I don't think it's that hard to. I visited the other day. I don't think it's that hard to read.
Yeah.
First of all, it's a dumb little shed.
So why is an architect
I'm
designing a
not
dumb little
finished.
shed?
I'm not finished.
Because we should.
That dumb little shed had to get a face because it's out on a major street. That's a busy street, 25. And it's a fire station, which it is essentially a public building, has a civic responsibility to the rest of us. He achieved it in some unusual ways. He took a sander, sanded that front, buzzed off the round tower so it had now a flat face, and had the presence of mind to change his brick to white in the middle, though it looks like it's grabbing eccentric shapes. Half of the garage where the fire truck goes in has got the white over it. A piece of a window's grabbed, and it goes up the tower, this buzzed off tower. If you drive down that street, that contrast will stop you. It stops me. I almost have an accident when I go past it because it's actually building a rectangle, half of which is made out of air. You can make a perfect square out of the width of the white and the height of the white if you fill in the rest of the square. That's called visual power
And
in
that's
design.
called architect speak.
No, it's not.
Because
Anyone can feel it. Anyone can feel it.
No, I'm
I can get a
sorry.
5th grader to see that. It's
No.
not that difficult. It's just if someone's not trained. But it works on you. People don't have the words for it, but they feel it.
Well, and I think that's a
That's
problem.
No, but,
Yeah.
but this is the simplicity of proportion and scale used to great advantage. And it's interesting because when you flashed, I hadn't connected that till you said church, because Marlon Backwell just had a National Honor Award winner with a beautiful redone Butler building down in Alabama or Mississippi. Arkansas, excuse, no, well, he's from Arkansas, but the project's up in
Project's in
Mississippi.
Arkansas.
It is, okay.
Yep.
But using the same lessons here. I mean, if you
Yes.
put those two together on the screen today, we'd say, where have we come in 50 years? We've come to accept that background buildings count. And architects should be taking this sensibility to the background. And so,
Yeah, but the background doesn't need to be this sort of convoluted geographic exercise, but and that nobody except the in-house people understand or care about, and do a form that's basically reminiscent of something else. So the thing that was said about function and form together, somehow functioning together, is somehow convoluted here. So, and I think that's one of the huge problems, is that, and if you guys want to speak to each other this way, I think great. I love it. You should be speaking to each other this way because you know the lingo. But don't use that out in the public.
yeah, but you're in your magazine calling forth the same forced conversation. When you choose your cover, you engage us in a conversation just
Yeah.
like Manchuri did.
Right.
Okay,
right,
why?
Right.
Why? You want to sell magazines? You're just a pure profiteer?
No, well, that too. Believe me, I wish we were. But I mean, we all, but the point is, we don't use language that sort of obscures the
Okay, let's
the
go to the
thought
indigo,
behind
please.
it.
Let's go to the indigo.
Ed needs
No,
to.
I just want to.
Okay, here we go. Here's the indigo. What lessons were learned? Is this a better building on the street than the fire station? More
Easier
important?
for you to read?
This building is the most banal thing I have ever seen.
How do you know
It's a
that?
great ice
How do you know
It
that?
has a great ice maker, he
It's
says.
Yeah, how do you know it's banal?
It looks like everything else. It looks like anything on the strip. It doesn't differentiate itself at all. The interior is a hodgepodge of decorator mistakes. So it's not uplifting. It's not giving me anything.
But it is
I hope the bed is comfortable.
But it's aspirational because we really do want design, and when we get led astray here in fashion, that's troublesome.
Yeah.
And I agree with you totally, right? But, you know, Ed's at home because he just saw a bunch of wonky columns in Holland. And there we have the Holland influence in the porte cochere.
Hey, it could have
You know,
been
it's all these.
It
yeah.
could have been a Holiday Inn
In
Select.
Holland. Yeah, right, there you go.
So,
Okay,
no,
but
no,
anyway.
it could have been worse.
But I think that, you know,
But the
this
very
designer
thing that's present in the Venturi
Yeah.
is what's absent here.
Yeah.
There's
Yes.
no actual composition to the parts.
Yeah,
They're a
exactly.
pastiche.
Yes.
I dropped off Mike Mentz this morning after the radio interview, and just parked there while I was getting it. I counted, because I knew this conversation was going to happen, how many elements I saw grouped together. A bucket of petunias next to a gaggle of columns to some rocks put on the ground with a picket fence that then transitions to another kind of fence, which transitions to another material. Then it goes to a base of fake stone. And they're all within about 6 yards of each other, none of which harmonized.
They were on sale.
Like that. They were on sale.
Yeah.
It looked like something that was
But
Could I just interject one thing? I'd like to go back to the placemaking question. No, seriously. I'm at a disadvantage because I'm looking at this stuff in two-dimensional images. And to me, only the Miller House I can relate to because it's in the middle of a green forest type of thing, and I can talk about the relationship to nature and things like that, although I'd like to see it eventually. But most of these other things, unless I really see the context of how that fits into the community or has generated a positive change within the community, which I don't know if it did or it didn't, but you know, this I can, you know, this is abstract. This is a piece of art. This could be a piece of sculpture, a piece of art. The other stuff have other responsibilities. They have other overlays. That fire station is very important. It's not just a background building, because fire and life safety is one of the most important things of a community. And it is something that people are cognizant of. I know where my firehouse is, where I live, and I live in a big city. So, I mean, it is something that is important. Whether this go back to the firehouse.
You don't know that it is there.
I don't know. I don't know.
You don't.
I mean, but I'm not going to criticize. To me, I saw Mondrian. I saw, you know, I saw.
great.
No. I was trying to sound intellectual, and I was trying to find something that I could say. I do see the rest of the rectangle. I do.
Yeah,
I do. But you know something? When I looked at it first, unless you told me to look for it, I'm not criticizing it. It's just that I do think that there was another calling here that was different than pure architecture. He saw it as a billboard. It's basically a billboard, and it's not a three-dimensional expression to me. It's a very flat billboard.
But
and
it's a graphic.
It's a graphic.
Yeah.
It's a two-dimensional graphic. But that's not. There's nothing wrong with that.
But it's
No,
a very
there's
bad graphic designer.
Well, we can get into that.
this was high Venturi. We had more things to come.
All right.
But, you know, I think there's also the inspiration of the buildings we saw coming from Indianapolis to this location. These are the service buildings of the farmland. These are saying that these humble things that we aspire to, these are the buildings we paint. I mean, the image of Wyoming architecture are the fallen down barns of Teton County. We have this romance with that sort of pastoral thing. Ordinary buildings can become this, and this has so many lessons as we look at how we don't build new, but repurpose and fit the fabric of this placemaking we're talking about. There are
Okay, so-
lessons of mastery here.
So I would like to ask a really tough question here, because I've been hearing this architectese for 30 years, so I think I know the lingo, but I still don't see why it needs to be shared publicly. So the question though, I mean, if this is important to architecture, and if this kind of geometric interplay is the part of the definition of architectural excellence and new ideas, then how do we talk to the public about these issues? Because you're going to start holding forth about the geometry and how it all fits together and how it sort of made you into this gave you this experience of ecstasy. that is not gonna make it. I mean, people don't see it. And we are an extremely visual culture, but an extremely visually illiterate culture. So how do you begin to talk about these things if these are things that are important to architecture, to the public that really wants to know, I mean, really wants to understand. They're looking at this and they're saying, it's not a firehouse, I thought it was a church. What is that white doing there? I don't understand those windows. Why are those windows so little and that one is so big? You know.
Well, you know, we have people who experience this building,
Well, we'd like
and
to
I would
know.
like to hear.
I agree.
Yeah,
would
that's
like
what I
to
was
hear that.
thinking.
Well, most churches aren't numbered.
That's not true. There's the first congregation of church, the second, the third. They just don't make big numbers on it.
So are there some Columbus? Yeah. That's right. Are there some Columbus residents here that would like to speak to that? Here.
Not only churches, but most civic buildings do you think as having a tower. And talking about your placemaking, consider how this fits into the neighborhood. It does not stick out like a sore thumb. It's on basically a residential lot, and it fits.
My guess is that for the average, you say you represent the public, and I know you do. I know you're trying to represent the public, a la Jane Jacobs to an extent.
I would never aspire to Jane Jacobs.
But I would guess that the vast majority of the public just sees it as kind of a nice little fire station and as a yawner, not bad, not horrible, just okay. It's a nice new fire station.
So you just said it. I mean, so why do you call it architecture then if it's a yawner?
Well, I'm not calling it architecture.
I mean,
To me, it steps above the safe, the good value, and the pride of place. And it steps above because it has an idea and a challenge. And if it is fitting in its setting and it's occasionally a yawner, for other people it will be a challenge. Why is it there? And it might be the 5-year-old who is like, what is that about? And then finds out it's where they have the hoses hanging to dry. But as a challenge in ideas, it has a place at this table.
Marlene? Yeah. Sure.
So I'm so fascinated that there's all this discussion on the fire tower, because I think it goes back to something I was starting to say, which is there's an expectation, because we know who did that project should have excellence. And I would say that the indigo is so fascinating to me, because in fact, clearly there was money, clearly there was intent, and clearly it didn't succeed. And clearly it shouldn't, because it's in a very important place. And if anything, that's even the more important discussion, because we should say we do expect those projects to succeed. They're highly important in terms of an architectural contribution to our city. And so what can we say about that project specifically to the public that says, why in fact would we consider that a project that has not succeeded?
You know, I'm confused. Was this a project that was subsidized? No. Oh, good. All right. I'm encouraged. Now, the reason I ask that is that, you know, people asked what did we do when we had this design excellence program to get it across to people that we wanted something better than the average, and we basically said in the first sentence, we said this is an opportunity for design excellence in public architecture. So we put our cards on the table in the beginning, which was a calling that if you're going to do something, we may not tell you how to do it, but we expect it. We have a level of, apparently they did not have the same contract that Mr. Venturi had, or the others, or the Sarinins, that there was an expectation of them to produce something, but these guys, or gals, whatever, they were just told, do a Holiday Inn that looks sexy. I mean,
but here's another issue here. No, I think I wanna say something here because it's driving me crazy. So here are these beautiful buildings in Columbus. The world of architecture knows about them. They're some of the most interesting modern buildings around. People have known these for generations. So you would think that Columbus has an aesthetic culture and understanding of architecture, because these buildings are on the ground and in their neighborhoods, that their judgment about building something like this would overrule something like this. And overrule the sort of commercial
But I
strips.
need to say, as a resident in defense of Hotel Indigo, in context, I think many of us are charmed that the hotel tried to do something that was different from our other places. They have an adorable dog in the lobby. They are a great corporate citizen that provides free housing for virtually all of our VIPs when they come in. They are a wonderful citizen of ours. And just as you accept all of your relatives around the table, and some wear kind of clunky stuff and some look gorgeous, this is a living town, and not everything is going to meet your standards, but it doesn't mean that many of us don't appreciate what they tried and support them for what they did.
But I'm not talking about our standards, I'm talking about your standards as a town.
Yeah, because I guess what we're looking at is what has been the effect of these 100+ buildings
Right.
that exist.
Yeah.
How have they changed things? Because one would hope that they did raise the bar for your civic consciousness, and that when you looked at these drawings for this was not a special one-off Indigo for your town. There are 100 other ones across America, and that should have been the flag to you that says, hey, we're a special place, doggone it. This is where architecture is an industry.
Well,
Yeah,
some of the data, and it may be dated now, but we have had more awards for art from our young people growing up than you would expect in the population as such.
That's beautiful.
We
Yes,
have more
yeah.
architects coming out of here,
Yeah.
more artists coming out of here, that it does make a difference.
That's beautiful, and I know it does. I mean, because the beautiful thing is that it was about, in large part, your schools, where the greater generousness of Mr. Cummings, Mr. Irwin Miller got going. That's really special.
But we have buildings by prominent architects that did not have the Cummins program.
Exactly.
The IMA library.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
That was not the Cummins program.
Oh, over here, sorry.
To go back to the conversation about placemaking.
He moved his place. He's
I
roving.
actually would say that, A, we're talking about a building that's literally just out the door.
Yeah.
We're looking at the opposite side of what it does when you walk out the door. And again, I hate to criticize you guys, but you're talking about the object a little bit more than you're talking about how the object defines the place. It would be interesting to hear, because I know you guys have probably spent some time in town, just ignoring the architectural edifice, ask yourself the question and give us an answer of how do you think that's changed the place based on where it sits in the urban landscape? Is there, because this is the other side of the building, it's the suburban side, there's no doubt about it.
It's not in an urban landscape, it's in a suburban drive-in. And you have to cross the highway or the road to get here, and so it's not placemaking. It doesn't make any place. It just uses the car again to drive up, park, get in, forget about everything else, move on. And I think if that's the culture that we're building, then we deserve these kind of placeless places where we spend more time in our cars. I don't drive. I'm a New Yorker. I don't need to drive. But I really do feel that until we come to terms with what surrounds buildings and what urban areas need to deal with in our current culture, in our current oil-dominated culture that is all about individual movement, we're not going to fix this. This is beyond our understanding. You're going to be always building garages. You're going to be always building roads in the middle of town because you have to accommodate the car. So no placemaking is going on.
I mean, we have two buildings in the Indigo and the post office that both have put their back ends to each
Yeah.
other.
Yes.
And they have on Brown Street, Brown Avenue, which is one of the prominent things, we have the headquarters of Cummins Diesel, I think, on that street, showing its front to the back. And I would challenge that, unfortunately, in the Roach and Dinkloo post office, they're not much better than the Indigo in really defining a building that's about place and about what surrounds in the context of how that would have engaged at the
They
street
also
scale.
sat at the perimeter of town.
Yeah.
They sat at the edge, the periphery, so they didn't have the obligation to put a face there. That pressure's starting to change as this town develops, and that street and that one's being looked at very seriously. And what will happen, using your own word, Susan, is that density like in New York City, there's a lot of perfectly serviceable but perfectly, I would say, plain speak buildings that are the good urban soldiers, but make me feel that I'm walking on a bona fide piece of urbanism because it's a street that makes a volume of space that I'm walking in. In time, as something buddies up to that, left and right, it will be more forgiven because it'll become absorbed into a larger context. But that pressure will come because the city will in time keep expanding. And this
But
is
you
one
have
of
to
the portions that's being looked at.
You're gonna have to go through all that pavement in order to do that, so you wasted a lot of energy building something that basically shouldn't have been built in the first place.
Well, that's what the placemaking to me is very important, because I am in one of the rooms that faces the rear end of the post office, which is where I saw the Home Depot.
That's why you know all
I
about
know
your
the Home Depot,
refrigerator.
right? But you know what I find really interesting is, why did it have to be a 4-story building? In other words, if you are trying to create a density or the feeling of relationship to street or the relationship to urbanism, not everything has to be a 4-story building that can use 2 elevators. I mean, there is a pragmatic overlay, granted, but there is also another giving that even if zoning permits it to be a 10-story building, it might not be the right thing to do. That maybe it should have engaged the street or set a generating pattern that would be exemplary for the next building that would be developed. That's the responsibility, that's that next level that I don't see there, and that's my biggest criticism. I mean, I was shocked how remarkable the interior
You guys are
was.
not being fair to this building. This building has, you can't see it as because you're looking across the street, but this building in fact has a pedestrian entrance on the street.
Which is good.
And so we are looking at the back of this building, which is great. They put the cars in the back. You know, the city, the downtown is, there's nothing there. And so this, I believe this was in fact designed as a pedestrian thing. They're not connected yet, but when they are, that front door is gonna work.
Yeah, but we came from that front back door you're speaking of, and that is a bad alley door at best,
Yeah.
okay? And we just came out of it,
Yeah,
okay?
we just came out of it.
We almost, it's not what you're billing it as, okay?
Through
And
the
you're all turned
center.
around. Yeah, through the center, yeah,
Center,
yeah.
yeah, across the little
Yeah.
patio.
But I guess what we're looking at right now, and let's get this idea of placemaking. When will our communities commit to visionary, again, a collaborative planning between the experts that we've now come to agree belong on a team? Has Columbus, with all their individual buildings, I know Alexander Girard did some historic work on the Main Street. Great thing. It's not acknowledged as much as it should be. Couldn't even find it on a Google search. And I know that was really important, okay? But is there a master plan in play? And that would have been so prescient back in the 60s when this whole thing started, to make that gift of planning. Because planning, you know, again, it's one of these alien things. I mean, planning's been taken over because by the time you get to planning, you've been through the check of the highway department, the road department, all these other agencies. When can we come together in the scale of these cities that we all tend to spend lots of money to go on holiday to, and we walk and we walk and we love, right? There is still that chance, you know, but we're a young nation, we're a young country, and the car has been part of half of our existence, you know, and it changes the scale.
Here.
Buildings in a community are the face of your community. When I go to the post office and see the front of the post office, you know, I take some ownership in that. That's my post office. When I walk in and conduct my business in the post office, that's my community building. That's my post office. Those are my postal workers. When I live in a small town, I don't really go to the hotel. The hotel could be plywood painted on both sides. Most people in Columbus will never go into that building.
Why not?
Which
Because
that's
they
a good
don't,
problem.
they have homes that they live in. They don't live in the
Well, we have
hotel.
homes in New York, but we go to hotels all the time.
You got great lobbies and bars.
Yeah.
Yeah, great lobbies,
Lobbies,
restaurants,
bars,
There's a
restaurants.
disconnect between New York and small
But-
towns like Columbus, I think they are.
But old hotels were a centerpiece of
Right.
communities,
Exactly.
right? So they still have that ability.
They have that ability, but your operative word there was were.
Yes.
In the past, they were. They were social centers where you would go for dances and dinners. And in small town America, or in small community America, we typically don't go to the town hotel for dinner. We go to a restaurant or something that's a little bit more convenient and less formal. So I think from a community standpoint, a small town's hotel is a place for people out of town to stay when they come in to conduct business or visit with family.
I think
But
all we're
that's-
saying is that a
it's
small town
broken.
hotel can be a destination
Yeah.
for the people who live there too. If it has the appeal, the amenities, the services that the people who live there could use. So I mean, it's not as simple as just plunking down a hotel for out-of-towners, but it is part of the community. That's what we're trying to say here, that the building should function that.
those programs,
Exactly.
the needs back. There's a comment, someone in the back here, hand up.
Well, I was just going to make the point that there has been quite a bit of planning in Columbus over the years by some very big names starting in the early 60s, and we've dodged some big bullets. I mean, where we're sitting right now, at one point was going to be a mega structure that went from Washington Street to the river, and then there were plans to, mall downtown, make a pedestrian mall for Washington Street. There was the Girard plan. There are fragments of that still existing, but our planning has been very incremental, and it's been subject to the same vicissitudes of change in fashion that architecture has. So, we're lucky.
Paul, we're gonna jump up here.
The only thing I was listening to this, kind of wondering if I was in the same town as you guys, because I come from Iowa. I hang around a lot of 40,000 size towns, and this is the most remarkable one I've ever been in. I've never seen a place with 40,000 people that has. I mean, most of the 40,000 population communities you're talking about don't have 2 or 3 blocks of placemaking at its best. They have like virtually no placemaking. And I mean, I have to say that there's a strip over there here that is, one of the most, the best kind of small city experiences I've ever seen. So I mean, I realize that, hey, we're a critical profession, and we can look at this and say, yeah, Jesus, that hotel could have been better. But I am struck by how amazing this place is, and I'm completely convinced that you have a few Saarinen buildings and a couple good Kevin Roche buildings, a couple really not so great ones, but you pepper the city with some really great architecture, and it elevates the place, because it clearly has.
And that's precisely what we're saying, is that here it is, and you have it in your genes now, and it still makes places like that hotel. So
Sure. I mean,
it's a problem.
It's going to have bad. They're not all going to be great.
But isn't the joy of America the courthouse square that is across our land? And that is the zenith of so many towns that are forgotten, that didn't have success to push them farther. Do really remain, whether it's Busby, Arizona, old mining town. There are so many different places, town squares and things like that, that really is the joy of Americana. I mean, I was in Jackson, Mississippi a couple weeks ago. I mean, it looks like it came out of a 50s movie set at one level. It's both the sadness and the success of being passed over. But we do have a lot of great things, and people are going back to those towns and those cities because that is where the action is. We are finding in this digital age, in this cyber world, in this virtual world, comfort in that third place. And along with placemaking, it is the third place that we take comfort in being with other people and not talking to our devices. Gee, I haven't checked my device for a while. I better get onto it. But we're having a conversation. That's pretty cool.
The two things that I learned during my tenure in dealing with lots of cities and lots of people and lots of stakeholders is that there are two very important decisions in the beginning of a project. It has something to do with your placemaking. First one is the selection of the architect. And there are differences. It doesn't mean you have to be a black cape architect. There are very emerging talents out there, but their portfolios should show that. The selection of the architect is the beginning, and that's what the Miller thing was. They picked top architects. They don't have to be top. There are some that probably were in the beginnings of their careers. But the other thing is the selection of the site, which is the context. Those are the two most important decisions, because if you have a really good architect
even if you give them a budget that is crappy, that they will do a better design than throwing as much money as you can at something. That's a baseline. The other thing is the site, because a good site will help an architect to achieve a better solution. And that's whether it's urban, suburban, whatever it is. I have not studied Columbus yet. I really haven't had a chance to go other than the lobby, into the lobby of the hotel, which actually I kind of like the dog. I mean, there were certain things I liked about the lobby, but the thing is that I don't yet know whether that's the right place for that hotel, because maybe if it was closer to where the activity center of the community is, it might have generated the next growth and the next pattern of positive development. I just don't know enough yet.
Can you say that that hotel has character?
Don't look at me.
Does that count?
It's not character.
It has no character.
It has no character. It has no personality.
Suggests that when it starts to get messy vitality, it may not be the best example.
No, it's just another brand arriving like a Denny's or a McDonald's or anything else.
Yeah.
It's just
Yeah,
of the
so-
moment.
yeah.
I think there's a new, I think younger people are closer to it. I think there's starting to be a lot more interest in collaboration. I think the communities we talk about that have a sense of place, what makes them strong is they do have a sense of nationality. You go into Saint Germain in Paris, it's a cacophony of different things. And I think we're starting to learn about how to maybe bring those into buildings. There's a Ralph Adams building at Yale that is Gothic on one side and Tudor on the other. Is that bad? I think we're putting far too much emphasis on the art of something. And that it's one artiste who stands here, holds it all together. Question whether that's perfection.
The problem with the hotel is generic. It's not made
Yeah.
for here. It's made for anywhere.
Exactly.
Yes.
The point of us, our job, are to create specific buildings, special buildings for special places. And I think that goes back to an education of the public. What are they seeing that makes them think that this is special to them when it's not? I think, we're losing that disjunct between client, the public, and the architect. Where's that in between that shows them what's special to their place and not just generic hotel.
And in response to, well, just a second, on the response to the generic. Aloft was an interesting experiment in the whole process of living on the road that reached and now has set the bar for every indigo imitation. So you had somebody that really invested, and we're not saying is that a great building or not, does it belong somewhere? At least it's culturally contextual to our time. The indigo is not, in my mind. It's not even a time or place. It just is this collage at a lower price point. I mean, when have I seen a $119 price on a hotel room lately? It's new, it's fresh, it's clean, we like that, but new and fresh and clean doesn't cut it. I mean, you want,
Well,
it's
just one last reminder, because it will help us perhaps a little for the rest of the week. I thought that we were here to discuss the definition of what determines excellence. And now we're getting into debate of what defines acceptable. And that's a different argument. I like my room there. I do. I have a counter that I can shave. I don't have to put my stuff on the toilet seat.
You're gonna have a short
So,
check
I mean, no, seriously. I mean, the main thrust, I think, of what we're trying to accomplish is what is that thing that talks about what is a keeper, what is a contributor to defining our generation, our civilization at this time. Not is it, it's okay, it's nice. There are lots of nice buildings, and I'm just saying, I don't want to be confused, because I don't dislike that hotel. I mean, I really don't.
Okay, so there is so much. This is great. We've got everybody primed. This conversation is going to actually continue on. We've got 15 minutes here, and I've got, how many of you? 5 of you. And so I really am going to ask you 2 minutes closing to go down the line. Oh, we're going to start. Kelly, you start here. Are you prepared to do that?
Close.
2 minutes. Your closing remarks, these are your last statements, and then we're just going to go down the line and we're going to bundle it all up.
Can I yield my minutes to others, then reclaim them at the end?
Nope, sure.
Nobody wants to be
Okay, I'll start.
Are you running for president?
It's a closing, just because of this conversation, including the hotel. When we talked about the importance of the architect in the place, as important is the client.
Yes.
And I think part of this discussion was that there's a client somewhere else who had a mercantile objective, and it could be very successful. The architect could have listened to that and made a temple of commerce that's going to be vibrant in some way to the bottom line. But so that the client is terrifically important, and the advantage that Columbus has is in having civic clients who know their community and know what they need, and offer those to architects who can come from other places and listen to those and accomplish something here. Go ahead. Oh. Ed?
No, I agree. When I said place and architect, I assumed the client was a wonderful client. I was. But, I mean, honestly, it's fair. It's a triangle. It's a triangle. It's basically the client, the architect, and the community that they're building within. You can't have success without the other. The other thing I think that's very important is I don't know what the execution strategy was for the hotel. I don't know whether it was developed by a developer who chose an architect, and I just don't know. I don't know enough about what created it, but I do think that there are probably some wonderful examples in Columbus that are truly, will meet the test of excellence. We don't know what that is yet, but there are buildings here definitely, and that's a wonderful thing for this community.
So I think we have a lot to talk about, because when little dogs and celebrating the local help is brought into a discussion about architecture, then we're talking about very different things. And I love little dogs, and I respect the local help, but that has nothing to do with the excellence of the architecture and what it could have done to the town. So I don't know where this public and architect exchange begins and how it begins in a much more productive way, but this is not it, because we are cross-talking here, and we're talking about different things, and we have to somehow agree that the designed environment reflects us as a culture, as human beings that occupy that environment at any given moment, and our architecture does matter. And how do we talk about that, being concerned about the beauty around us, the ability of architects to give us that beauty that we seek, that we really need. Everyone has this sort of inner sort of yearning for this kind of uplifting, beautiful place. So how do we begin to talk about that and not be diverted from it? Because we get diverted into all of these little sidebar conversations and lead nowhere. So I'm really interested in connecting instead of talking in separate languages.
I think what's unique in Columbus, and we sort of get caught up in all the names and the history that's here. But the fact is that there was a fee that was normative that was paid to architects to do these buildings. They didn't get higher fees, okay? They were just competing at that level. The other thing that's interesting is that along with the largeness of the foundation and the method so many of these people were inspired by, the budgets didn't change. The church had the church's budget, the school had the school's budget, and somehow they cobbled together, more than cobbled, they created architecture from these standards. And that's what I think we can all take back to our homes and our cities and our communities, is that we can't make the excuse. And whether that's the developer coming to us for a hotel and saying, hey, Mr. Indigo, do you realize where you're building this particular one in Columbus, Indiana? There is an opportunity here. Now, we're not going to change your budget because that's not necessary. But we have to have something that we won't become the point of a conversation with a bunch of elite architects someday, okay? But I mean, it would just be good business. That would have sent such a much stronger message to us than the dog in the lobby and the name tags on the corner, okay? It's much a gift of respect to you, the people of Columbus. You deserve respect, and I'm very happy to be here in reflection. It's been almost 50 years, and I'm happy to be back, so this is cool.
Someone used the word that I think you did, that the city, this town is peppered with it's 72 plus modern buildings. And that's probably a right word. A few times, in a few places, they're coagulated to make something, like the space between the library and First Christian, or our county courthouse area. I look forward to seeing the peppering get denser, so that there's more glue between them. But I know that when I walk around this town, I'm not from here, I'm new, that when I engage one of those buildings, I feel hope. That's the best thing I can tell you. And that means a lot to me. Okay, I'm an architect. I'm supposed to be able to read those funny buildings and hear the language and the words of the people that thought about them and made their little moves. Hope's big. So I'm grateful to be here to see that and hope to contribute to it.
And the hope is that 4-story new housing that's happening right now that looks like maybe attainable workforce housing that's a block from here. Now that's hope at density, that the downtown will have that street, and somebody might go over and pet the dog and have dinner at that restaurant in the hotel and make it a place.
So, and let's not forget that these buildings were built at a time of great optimism in America.
That's true.
And what we have to figure out is how to get that back, that innate American can-do optimism, and I can say this as an immigrant wholeheartedly because I bought into this probably more than you have, who have been born here. So I think it's really, really important to figure that one out, because societal optimism builds beautiful buildings.
You're seeing the evidence of it still in this town, because it's why I'm here and why this center is here and why we're going to try to provide a new model for the educational designer in this town. So it still lives in this town. I wouldn't be here otherwise. So to Columbus.
Yeah.
Here, here.
Well, thank you, everyone.